Hello, and thanks for joining us today. I'm super excited you could be here. Today, we're talking about one of the most important things you need to know when it comes to raising money, which is really how to find and pitch investors. So, as a lot of you know, I'm on the debt side of things, right? But there's this whole other world out there of investors that really want to invest, some on the debt, some on the equity side. And this is something that we don't talk about as much as we should because we talk you can get money from credit card companies or lenders or all these other sources, but investors are oftentimes the best avenue for you, especially if you're raising larger amounts of money or don't necessarily want to deal with some of the terms that you may get from alternative lenders or high risk lenders. So with us today is Scott Kelly, and Scott's actually a neighbor of mine right here in St. Pete, Florida, and he's the founder and CEO of Black Dog Venture Partners, a business accelerator that helps disruptive companies secure funding, grow sales, and scale faster through a network of over 13,000 investors and 40,000 business partners. Now, he's got about 3 decades of experience working with entrepreneurs and investors, and he's trained thousands of salespeople and built a reputation for driving innovation and growth as well. He's also created is the host of the VC Fast Pitch, a national series of investor founder matchmaking events that connect startups with top venture capitalists and angel investors. As a matter of fact, he just had one I think last night that was super successful. We were talking about before we actually jumped on. And he's actually known as a dynamic MC and connector. He leverages his network to help founders and investors succeed. So in addition to that, Scott is also a college professor and host of the Emerging Managers podcast, where he explores why new VC funds might be the next great investment. Outside of work, he's also a proud father and owner of Melvin, the company's namesake mascot. I got to see Melvin. Melvin sounds super cool. Scott, what's up, man? Welcome to the show today.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it, Ty.
Yeah, I'm really excited you could be here because you are on a different side than I am of money, which I think oftentimes the more important side. So that being said, talk a little bit about what you found in all the time you've been doing this that are maybe some of the best tips to help invest people out there to be able to find the right investors.
Absolutely. What I tell people when entrepreneurs want to go raise equity capital, they should start building their network 6 months before. Because the reality is you have to, it's like any sales process. You have to build your funnel of qualified prospects. You've got to build the relationship with them and then prepare yourself for the call and the consequences of where this first call goes. And so a lot of it starts with building the right list. I think unfortunately, a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, they get a great idea and they just feel they need to barrage people with LinkedIn DMs and throwing pitch decks into their inbox. But you got to be more strategic. So I tell everybody, this is a numbers game. If investors are hoping if they get a 300 average in wins, that's a win for them. If you can get a 300 average in people responding to your opportunity, you're in the Hall of Fame. But it all starts with building the right list of investors. And what you have to do is a couple of things. You have to make sure you find the right stage of investor and the investor in your industry. Because if you just go out there and just willy-nilly send information and outreach to potential investors, you're going to waste their time and they're going to waste yours. So the first step is you got to build a list. You got to have 100 minimum, maybe 200 investors that you've researched that invest in your stage. If you're a raw startup, you're not going to necessarily go after the large VC firms because you're just not advanced enough. So you probably want to talk with angel investors, high net worth individuals first. So determine on the stage, determine the investor, but then you want to research these investors to see if they invest in your industry. What you don't want to do, you don't want to pitch a software investor your biotech. It's just a waste of time. And so that's the really first important thing. You need to build that over a significant period of time, or a lot of companies hire us because we already have that. But if you're going to do it on your own, you have to start with that, and then you've got to build a pitch deck, which really gives you the investors the answer to the key questions that they want to know. What's your problem? What's your solution? How do you make money? What are you using this money for, and how you're going to get that money back to the investors, give them a return of their capital and a return on their capital. And then really it's like any other sales process. You have to work through the communication. It really starts with being ready first. I tell people, like I said before, if you want to raise money, start 6 months ago, building all these things.
Yeah, and I still appreciate this. It's interesting because I was having lunch with a guy that wanted some assistance and some feedback yesterday on raising money, and we talked about this. He said, "Why aren't you in this side of the business?" I said, "Because, man, exactly what you said." I said, "These investors invest industry specific. We deal with every industry." I said, "So you're talking about tens of thousands of contacts you really have to be able to help our clientele do what you do." And sure enough,
Right.
you do, right? Like you've got like 650, 60,000 contacts with these partners and investors, but you have to have people don't underestimate the difficulty of what you do because it is all individual relationship based and you have to have thousands of them to really be able to help the masses. So just kudos to what you do and how you do it. Now, let's say somebody wants to come into this and I'm a SaaS company. Okay. So we'll just use me as an example. So where do I begin the process? It's funny. I read a book on angel investing a while back, and this was a little bit older before AI and technology. And it said, the first thing you do is move to Silicon Valley because that's where all the investors are. Like, well, this is going to be a tough book. But I mean, it's realistically like, how do I go and find SaaS investors or investors in my
Right.
space that will lend to my industry?
Well, there's a lot of great resources you can pull to build this list. I think LinkedIn is by far one of the best tools out there, in all frankness. You can search by investors, see their profile. You can use tools like Crunchbase, PitchBook, AngelList. These are websites where you can begin to do this research and find their contacts, find their LinkedIn, find their email address. So you start with that. But honestly, I found one of the best ways to build the best investor is research other companies in your space that successfully raised money, find out who their investors were, and then maybe even ask for a referral. You'll find many times that a successful entrepreneur, they understand it's a grind. You're going to hear hundreds of no's. And so you need to have a database at scale. But previous successful companies that have raised money in your space are probably the best source. And there's all kinds of events you can go to around the country. As you mentioned, I host VC Fast Pitch event. We hosted an event last night. We actually have an online event tomorrow, but we do them every month, and we do them around the country. Go there and network with these investors. Don't pitch them. There's an old saying: if you ask for money, you'll get advice. So start by asking for advice in order to get money. And so I think there's a lot of good resources out there, but it takes some research. Obviously you can buy lists. They have mixed results, but what you have to do is like I mentioned before, you have to take a group of people and then move them in from a contact to a relationship, then a relationship to a pitch opportunity. Don't try to circumvent the process because at the end of the day, I get 500 pitch decks in my inbox every month, and any investor of any reputation is going to get at least that. And so they have to see what you're doing, and you really gotta, you really have to be, content is king. You got to be an expert in your space. We had an investor at a pitch event several years ago, and someone asked him the question, "How do I get in touch with you?" He goes, "Do something interesting. I'll find out about it." And so I think there's a lot of different ways you can build that list first, and there's a lot of great resources.
So when we're approaching somebody, let's say we go to LinkedIn and we find, potential investors. In my case, it's a SaaS company, right? So in that case, what do I do to start building a relationship? How do I make that first cold approach where it doesn't
Yep.
seem like I'm just like everybody else?
Right. Well, first thing you don't do is you don't become a LinkedIn connection to somebody and put your pitch deck in their inbox. Okay, that's a no. That you will get deleted and probably blocked. What you want to do is you want to ask questions. You want to make sure you've done a little homework on these people you connected. So maybe there's a post that was really interesting. Say, hey, I really was intrigued by this post. If you have a newsletter, I'd love to get on that list. Or say, I'd love to just learn more about the industry. Would you be someone I could speak to, or do you have anybody that you could recommend? So begin to do that relationship. I find that get the favor bank in your favor. Put some deposits into the favor bank first, and then be able to use it as the ability to make some withdrawals down the line. So it really comes down to getting if they're speaking at an event, go attend if you can make it. If they're doing a webinar, sign up for the webinar. Share their content. If they have a great post, repost it, share it. Those things, although they sound like small little items, that's how you begin to establish a relationship. And I think the reality is you start with that. Invariably, they'll ask, so tell me about your company. If they give you the opening, take it, but wait for the opening. But start with the relationship.
Let's say I get the opening. Am I just doing an elevator pitch at that point? Or do I even mention raising capital?
It depends. Obviously, I think it's very important to have a pitch deck with all the proper tools in it. And we have a startup toolkit that we offer for free, which includes a pitch deck template. And any of the listeners, I can make that available. But you want to have a good pitch deck. But the reality is investors look at opportunities differently. We have calls that we do with our companies and investors all the time. And sometimes they want to go through the pitch deck, have you do a presentation. Sometimes they just want a conversation. So you have to each conversation with an investor might take a different form. But you do have to have the basics. You have to have a well thought out pitch deck. You have to have a good deal room with all your due diligence materials in it. You should have that stuff before you begin the process. Because what's going to happen is if an investor gives you a call and they give you 20 or 30 minutes of your time and you give them a good pitch and they ask you for more information and you don't have it, they're moving on. So have everything ready first, then go out.
Okay, so everything ready first, but should I start going out and doing the warm up of finding the right contacts? So I should do it simultaneously, right?
Absolutely. Build. You can, as you're getting your pitch deck, getting all the information for your due diligence, maybe getting an outreach email put together and building your campaign. You can do that in conjunction with building these relationships.
So with that being said, now you said get all your things together, right? So let's talk about pitch deck. You mentioned a toolkit that we can get. Where can our audience go to get that toolkit?
Send me an email to Scott at Black Dog VP with the subject line toolkit, and I'll send you the link.
Okay, and repeat that one, Black Dog VP, right?
Yep.
Okay.
BlackDogVP.com.
Okay, so Scott at blackdogvp.com. Email you to get that toolkit. Okay. Yep. Perfect. I'm going to go ahead. If you're watching this right now and you want that toolkit, go ahead and email Scott. You may hate me for all the emails.
Not a problem.
And then I'll put that on the show resources page as well. Okay. So give me an overview, and I know your toolkit has this, but give me just an overview of what should be involved in a actual pitch deck.
Yeah, you have to have some core tenets in every pitch deck. One, you've got to have a clearly defined solution, a problem. And a problem that's scalable to a lot of people. So what is the problem you're trying to solve? And then you have to talk about your solution. Why is your solution better than anything out there? Is it faster, cheaper? Define that. You have to talk about your product market fit. How are you going to get to these customers? What you're going to price it at? How you're going to make money? So you have to have that figured out. I think a team slide is almost paramount, especially if you're an early stage investor. And if you don't have the budget to hire people, bring on advisors to fill the gaps in some of these categories. So probably have to solve how you make money. Your team, you need to know your competition. And I tell entrepreneurs all the time, don't say you don't have competition. I tell people the pencil is still competition to the computer. Okay, someone's out there in your space. And then you have to have the ask. You have to know how much you want to raise and be specific. Don't say I want to raise approximately $500,000. Do the research. Know how much you need to raise. If you are part of your use of proceeds is development costs, have a quote on development. If part of it is for salaries, understand what they are ahead of time. So when you go to the ask, how much are you looking to raise? What are you going to use the money for? And then what milestones can you accomplish and in what period of time? So for example, if you're raising $500,000, $250,000 for technology development, $100,000 for marketing, the balance for SG&A, other ancillary costs and salaries. Right, and basically say, if I get that money today, in 6 months we can have X. We can have our prototype done, or MVP done, or we could be in market. So you have to create that scenario. I think it's important to understand, what your exit options are. Investors putting the money in is the easy part. Getting the money out is the challenge. And so you need to show them a clear path to liquidity, or how you could achieve liquidity, and who potential acquirers could be. A lot of times we've had companies that their initial customers a few years later became the acquirer. So those are some of the basics that you need.
Now, you had said that you go through, you do a good pitch, they're going to want more. You don't have more, they're gone. So what else more outside of a pitch deck? What else should I have more ready for them?
You need to build your due diligence deal room. Basically what that is kind of an online, source of all the other information for an investor to make a smart decision. So that can include current financials and financial projections. It can include your team bios. It can include any intellectual property that you have, IP such as patents, trademarks, things of that nature. Your marketing plan. So again, there's in the toolkit. We have a list of all the due diligence items that you need to put together, and you need to have that put together in a proper place. You can use Dropbox, or you can use Google Drive. We work with Fidelity Private Shares, which is a great platform to put everything in one place. Because what's going to happen is, once you do this call, okay, I need to know all the information, because this is a private company. You can't go to your Quotron or your Bloomberg machine and learn about this company. Okay, they have to get that information from you, so you need to have all that information. I think it's a good exercise to have it in advance. And like I said, if you have a successful first call, that's going to be the next ask. So I would definitely have at least that information.
So we've got all this. We're putting together the pitch deck. We're putting together, and I love this because the due diligence is literally the due diligence they're going to do. So it's just like, the easier you can make their job, the more that they know you understand the process, and the easier that you are to work with. So all that makes.
And the reality is, they're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So they're going to ask you to do it. So it's not making their job any easier. It's your job.
Right. Yeah. And that makes a lot of sense. And it just prioritize you. I mean, dealing with debt for so long, I always say it's about underwriters. Like, the cleaner you can get together a package, the more they love you, and they're going to entertain what you have, because, they don't have to keep coming back. It's just, it saves them a bunch of time. Well, I should have started with this, but when does somebody really know whether they should be trying to get money from banks, fintech, main banks, credit card companies, business credit, versus when they should really be going the investor route?
Right. I'm going to start with, honestly, the vast majority of entrepreneurs shouldn't raise venture capital to begin with. Okay. And there's a couple of reasons. One, once you bring in another owner to your company, you bring in another opinion. And you really have to be comfortable with who that is. I think, obviously, I tell entrepreneurs all the time, the best way to raise capital on a non-dilutive basis is go sell something. Bootstrap. Try to elongate that process as long as you can. Now, obviously, debt can be a great opportunity because you're not giving up equity. The due diligence process is somewhat faster and easier. But you want to go raise angel or venture capital money. And I think it's probably, at some point, we should probably explain the difference between the two. You need to do that to really scale a business. Okay. I think there's a lot of, especially today in the age of AI, you don't need to hire, 50 programmers. You can hire one project manager and a bunch of AI agents and applications. So I think, some industries need money right away, a lot of money. If you're like in biotech or, med tech, or something that requires research and has a process, sure, you need a lot of money up front to do that. But if you're in a SaaS company or you have a consumer product company, you can build a business. Because if you have a company that has some revenue, you're in a position of strength. Okay. Being a pre-seed, non-revenue startup is a real challenge. Unless you are, Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, that's an uphill battle. So I think there's a time and place for it, but I think sometimes it's individual decision and it goes on a company by company basis. But I think the reality is build with what you can. Honestly, before I took my first company public in the 90s, and before I raised any money, and you'll appreciate this, I took out a bunch of credit cards and built my business that way. And, by the time I sold the business, I still owned 98% of it. So I think there's a lot of value in looking at all options. Obviously there's debt, there's credit, there's grants, there's a whole bunch of resources you can pursue.
You mentioned it, difference between angel investing and venture capital.
Yeah. I think and this is where the research becomes important. Okay. Venture capital firms typically aren't going to invest in a company unless they have a minimum of $1 million in revenue a year. Okay. So there's a lot of, venture capital gets press like, professional athletes, they get the press when everyone that's successful gets the press, in both raising capital and, in sports entertainment, but they don't talk about the thousands that went nowhere in either category. So I think an angel investor is somebody who's not operating a fund, because a venture capital fund is essentially a mutual fund that people invest in, and these managers are managing other people's capital. They're just investing in private companies versus public. An angel investor is typically investing out of their own account. It's their own money. These folks are retired, professionals, maybe somebody who had their own exit and now wants to invest in other startups. I think the reality is you should not be going after venture capitalists in 99% of the cases until you're at least $1 million in revenue, because they're just going to ignore you, or they may take your call. But what's going to happen at the end? Call us back when you had $1 million in revenue. So you're back at square one. So there's a lot of great angel investors out there. And the reality is there's some great angel groups, throughout the country. Here in Tampa, you've got a lot of good angel groups. Every city has a collection of angel groups that put their money together. There's opportunities to apply to them. You can go to their pitch events. There's a lot of things you could do there. But again, then sometimes there's some people that aren't on the radar, which could be your best investors. Some of them could be your clients. Some of them could be your suppliers that want to invest. So I think you've got to look at angel investors first, and then as you grow, graduate to venture capital firms.
So if we look at VC fast pitch, right, and we want to come and be able to have an opportunity to meet up with investors, where do we find groups like this? Like, where do we even begin the search of finding these local groups?
Sure. Well, honestly, you can Google Tampa angel groups or angel investors, and you'll find a ton of them. Okay. You'll find them when you can do a LinkedIn search for angel groups by geography and get their information. You could do that on other resources, like I mentioned, like Crunchbase, AngelList, and others. There's a lot of good places to find them. They're not difficult to find.
So it's just a matter of doing a little bit of due diligence searching. You can find those, and then that's where you'll go and probably start to meet some investors. The more you go, I imagine you're probably starting to run into many of the same investors as well.
Exactly. And that happens all the time. We hosted an event last night. We had, two entrepreneurs present at this dinner that we had, and we had probably, 20 or so investors in the room. And these people have been in the ecosystem. They see them at events. They built a relationship. So when the time came for them to pitch their own startup, they had that relationship. They met each other at various events. And so they were more inclined to come listen to their pitch.
Makes a lot of sense. When I'm in these groups, there's 10 people there that are investors. You already told us to help narrow it down based on industry. So what's good conversation starters? Like, are those things I ask them early on? Like, so, out of curiosity, what industries do you typically invest in? Like, what kind of questions should I be investigating?
This is networking, So when you go to these events, You talk less and ask more. Okay. You know, it was interesting last night. You know, we had an investor talk to one of our companies that presented, and someone just barged into the conversation. Don't do that. You know, have a little class, have some, be reputable, but ask them about themselves. You know, you get great intel. You show that you're actually interested in learning who they are. And I like I said, I've trained 1,000, salespeople in the past, and yeah, at the end, if they're not appropriate, it comes down to the most important question: who do you know? Because a lot of times, investors, if you get asked, it's much like sales. If they get asked that question, the worst thing that can happen is they say they don't know anybody. But we've had many occasions where investors say, "Look, this isn't a good fit for me. I want you to contact this person." And I say, and then we respond, "That'd be great. Would you mind doing an email introduction?" Get that affiliation going. And we've had many cases where a no referred us to a yes.
What you do is like got to be so rewarding. I mean, I love our space, like being able to take somebody that's got a vision and a dream and then get them the money and then watch them do what they do. It's like the coolest
Yeah.
thing ever. And I have so much admiration for you because you've been doing this a long time and you've built a huge network, and the joy of standing in an event and like, watching that connection take place, it's got to be pretty rewarding.
It's really nice. It's really exciting. You know, I moved here to St. Pete about 3 years ago, and we hosted a few events in town. And I brought in investors from outside of Florida, from California, New York, and our very first event. I'll tell you an interesting story. We did a pitch event in Phoenix about 9 years ago. They did it. The companies presented during lunch. They had lunch with one of the investors. Uh, a month later, they got invited to meet this investor in Menlo Park, California, where they got a $270,000 check. Um, a year later, that same investor led a $3 million round. 4 years later, they sold the company at a very lofty exit, and now they are the founders of Space Station Investments, one of the most active investors in the country. So they went from being asking for money to now being on the other side of it. And that's one of my favorite success stories, because they pitched for 1 minute on stage. And that turned into raising their money, selling the company, and becoming a venture capital firm themselves.
Wow. That's really cool. I appreciate you sharing that story with us. So, what about more? Tell me a little bit more about how somebody watching here can get to you and what you can do to help. Let's say we're in Tampa Bay together, but a
Sure.
lot of people watching are not. Like I've got people all over the country watching, some of them even around the world. So, like, what is the best way for somebody to get to you and to your network to be able to start
Mhm.
taking the steps that you've recommended here?
Well, typically what we do is we invite someone, we do online pitch events every month. And I offer everybody the opportunity to come in and listen in to an event first. Okay. If they're comfortable with that, then we get them involved in the process of pitching at one of our events. And I kind of use it as the litmus test. When we coach them, we make sure they have what they need to be, good. And then they do a 5 minute pitch. And based on the feedback we get and the response, then we say, okay, maybe we should expand the relationship and put you out to a larger audience. So it's really, we let them, come in. It's much like, when my kids played sports, I go, watch this guy play in a less risky environment. If you're successful there, then move on to, more endeavors and more opportunities. And that's typically how we do it.
That makes sense. So, online pitch events, how do I get to them?
Yeah, we have a website, vcfastpitch.com. We actually put both our online and in-person events there. We do monthly events online, but we do live events around the country. We've done 6 in the state of Florida since I've been here. We'll be in District Columbia. We'll be in Nashville. We'll be in New York, California, and we host them probably about 5 to 6 in-person events at different places around the country.
Okay, great. And I see that I can get them all on VC Fast Pitch. I also see on Fast Pitch that your social links are on the bottom of the page.
Mhm.
Um, Makes sense to follow there?
I would, because the reality is, in addition to the fast pitch events, I do webinars on all kinds of topics for entrepreneurs. We and they're all free. So we provide resources to them that help them scale their business, help them practice their pitch. We actually are going to be doing a webinar in a few weeks from now, specifically talking about what to put in your pitch deck. And so we do those all the time. And locally here in town, I've done hosted events at University of South Florida, University of Tampa, both online for the USF Connect group here and in person. So I feel that information is power. And so if they work with us, great. But I still want them to have the information, even if they decide to go it alone.
Yeah, I love that. Um, any other final tips as we get ready to wrap up? The things maybe we missed that you think is important for anybody out there that's looking to both create a good pitch deck and then find the right investor for their business?
Yeah, I think the main thing is you have to understand and be ready. This is a grind. You have to be ready to listen to a lot of no's. They did I think it was Jeff Bezos, they mentioned he pitched to, I think, 200 or 400 investors before he got his first check. Okay. So you have to have a tough skin. Okay. And it's like any kind of sales. You have to have I remember, we needed, at the end of the day, we ran out of leads. We were nervous because we didn't have more people to talk to. So you constantly build your funnel of relationships, understand you're going to get a lot of no's. Now, I can tell you sometimes a no is not a no. Sometimes it's a not yet. And I think it's really important if an investor tells you no, leave the door open for future communication. Ask them, may I send you some updates? What you're doing? Because sometimes you may not be a fit at this point, but somewhere down the line, you might be a good fit. They may not be liquid at this point and love the idea, but if you keep saying it, you keep in contact, you don't know what's going to happen. And so I think, so that's what I would tell you. Be ready for a grind. It could take, it's not the stories of someone picking up the phone, don't believe TV, don't believe Shark Tank. It doesn't happen on a first call. Okay. You're talking to hundreds. So have a tough skin, but build your business at the same time. Make yourself worthy of the investment while you're hearing a lot of no's.
Scott, I love it. Thank you. This has been enlightening. I mean, there's so many actionable tips that we walked away with. I mean, you literally laid out a roadmap, a blueprint, a guide of exactly how to succeed. So thanks for coming on with us today. Where should everybody go to take a next step? Should it be the VCFastPitch.com?
You can go to our website, blackdogventurepartners.com. You can find me at LinkedIn. All my social media channels are Black Dog CEO, so you can find me there. I am on LinkedIn on a daily basis. You can learn about all the events we're doing. That's probably the best source. Then obviously you can reach out to me via email.
Okay, perfect. Scott, thanks again for coming on with us today.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.
All right, so listen, if you're watching this, a couple things you should do. First of all, go to vcfastpitch.com. And at vcfastpitch.com, bottom of the page, you can access social channels, less than a minute to subscribe to know what's going on. But just as Scott has said, if you go to vcfastpitch.com, you can see their next online event. It's right there front and center. And then you can see the next events. Like I saw Nashville before he even mentioned it, they're on their site as well. So vcfastpitch.com. What I've learned from being at these kind of events is it's not just about meeting investors. It's just really about learning. Like you're learning the language, you're learning investors, you're learning how to approach people. And then eventually you get to a point where you might do a pitch and then you get tons of feedback and it helps you improve and improve. It's an art realistically. But if you're going to learn a skill set in art, I don't know, like raising money, not a bad one to learn, I mean, like probably one of those valuable you can learn throughout the time that you run a business. So make sure you check it out. The way to get there is vcfastpitch.com. Then make sure you also check out blackdogventurepartners.com. That's blackdogventurepartners.com. Again, bottom of the page. You could subscribe to the social links. There's 2 places you're actually able to access those social links. And there's a lot of great info there too, including a blog that gives you a lot of education. What I love about Scott is Scott's a giver. He's doing webinars, he's doing blogs, he's doing all this stuff, putting it out in the world to just help you figure this out and to be able to actually succeed. And he's also very transparent, saying, look, like this isn't money from the falls from the sky type of thing. You have to be out there working for it. But if you're willing to put in the work with his education, you're going to be successful. So make sure you check out those 2 resources, vcfastpitch.com and also blackdogventurepartners.com. And do not forget to go to the bottom of the page, subscribe on social. So that way you're able to see his next webinar, attend his next event, and start taking the steps to being able to bring investors into your company. So thank you very much for tuning in. Take care. Have a great day.